So let's look at some of the common mistakes that I've seen importers make over the years, or we have made over the years as well. The first one is what I like to call the urgent order syndrome. So we get emails like, I want to import 2,000 bean bags of the highest quality. We have this crazy demand, but we only have 2 days. And we get a lot of these emails. And this is, it's understandable because when you're starting out, you want to get the product in hand and you want to start selling ASAP. But this is a recipe for disaster. Number one, you'll have factories take shortcuts to meet your tight deadlines if you negotiate on the delivery time. The second issue we see is factories will commit to a shorter delivery time just to get your order, and they'll take the same amount of time anyways. This is the more common scenario. But if you push too much on delivery times, you can expect QC issues because that would mean factories cutting procedures. In most industry, for most products, there's a pretty set time period required to make products. Normally it's 15 days, but it could vary depending on the product. And I find if you push too much on that, if like 7 factories have told me the product takes 15 days and then this one factory comes and say we can do it in 7 days, I see that as a red flag. The second issue which we see especially with the newer importers is overestimating margins. So this happens because in an international trade transaction there's so many parties involved, from the factory to the QC people to logistics, and these are the obvious costs. So we often find people factor these in and miss out on some of the other costs like Amazon fee or stuff like that. The unexpected contingency costs also factor in. For example, you could have a customs inspection at the loading port or at the destination port, and a lot of people tend to miss out on these costs. But they end up saying, okay, we still got a 5% margin, and this is our first order, so we'll learn. And that's when the first batch of returns start to come in. The other issue, I think I've touched upon this earlier, is not drafting your requirements in detail. Once again, you have to be very, very specific when you're sourcing in China about what you want. If you send out an email saying, I want 1,000 Bluetooth headphones, you can get Bluetooth headphones in China starting at $10 going up to $1,000. And finally, not buying insurance. This is something, insurance is a very small cost. It costs anywhere from 0.3 to 0.5%. But we still see people miss out on this, just trying to save a few pennies here and there. And when you're importing by sea, there is something called the law of general averages, which basically means if a ship has to unload some containers due to bad weather conditions or whatever reason, the loss is shared by every consignee on that ship. So your goods might end up reaching the port, but you still have to pay a premium towards that loss. And insurance protects you against that and a lot of other risks. Not comparing like for like. So normally what happens is people who go on a B2B platform like Global Sources, they would get quotes from like 10 suppliers, start comparing pricing, shortlist the cheapest ones, negotiate further with them, and place an order. Normally what happens is with this process, it's very hard unless you ask a lot of questions and you have got a very good understanding of your requirements. We find most people are not comparing like for like. There's so many subtle differences that affect pricing. It could be the components, it could be raw materials, it could be the coating being used. Thickness is a common culprit in a lot of products. And these things are not obvious straight away. You have to ask the questions to get these answers. So it's important you don't rule out the more expensive suppliers in the earlier stages. Normally what I like to do is if someone's, say, a couple of dollars more expensive, I like to ask them why are they expensive. I like to ask questions. I normally give them the name of the competitor and see why is so-and-so, say $7 and you're $9, and they normally come back with an answer saying, oh, we use this PCB or we use this motor and stuff. Then I go back to the other supplier and ask, do you use this PCB? And normally the answer is no. So it's a little subtle things that we have to be careful about when we're in the initial stages of sourcing. So not realizing how economies of scale work. This is something which tends to be an issue with newer importers again. So this economies of scale should be taken into consideration every stage of the process, whether it's sourcing, whether it's logistics, even with marketing and sales. For example, if you get, I see a lot of people lose out on margins because they're getting very small quantities by sea, and they have a fixed cost at both ends, and their per unit logistics cost tends to be quite high. So you have to make those decisions early in the process. And economies of scale will pretty much be seen at every stage of the process. So whether it's the manufacturing, whether it's the logistics, it's something that you should account for when you're doing your planning. And I believe in China this even extends to private life. For example, these guys are making sure that they maximize the use of the scooter, and whoever said that China is contributing to global warming, they got a pretty low carbon footprint. And there's another example, not an inch of water is wasted.